Alrighty then. This brand new Glass Animals album. We need to talk about it. Let's go. I Love You So Fucking Much is finally out now. The much anticipated fourth album from Glass Animals and the follow-up to 2020's Dreamland, which I think is the greatest lockdown album ever. And I have seen some people actually disrespecting this album, but hand on heart, this was the album that came out when I was a fan of Glass Animals for the first time. A friend had recommended How to Be a Human Being to me, and I dived into Dreamland as their most recent album and I fell in love with it. I will not hear a single word of Dreamland slander, so coming into this album, my expectations for its quality were absolutely sky high. And what we got in eventuality, at least on first listen, I think was much less clear-cut for me. And from what it seems, from both the critical and the popular reaction, that was also the case for a lot of people. This is by no means a bad album, but I think most people can agree that compared to what has come before for Glass Animals, it's a little bit more of an awkward record. So I'd like to talk about where I think this album succeeds, where this album is a little more difficult to get into, and what maybe the key differences between this and previous Glass Animals albums are. So starting straight from the top, with the concept. Now, I think it's clear that space has really inspired this album quite a lot. And going in with the imagery of space for Glass Animals, it seems like to me that's quite a saturated market. There's a lot of bands from the history of music, you know, Pink Floyd, Muse have done space incredibly well. Declan McKenna with Zero started to touch on that kind of like glam nebula vibe. And the more I saw the singles come out from this album, the more I felt like, as much as I adore Glass Animals, it felt like their take on the sci-fi aesthetic was a little more watered down than we've seen from other bands. It's not the kind of bombastic, fun, spandex, shiny, kicking science fantasy. It's more like a kind of muted palette of blacks and whites and like a 2001 Space Odyssey style aesthetic. You can even see contrasting the two covers from Dreamland and the lyric video from Tokyo Drifting to I Love You So Fucking Much and Creatures in Heaven's video. We're dealing with a very muted palette here. It does look very Kubrickian to me, which is fine. I'm maybe a little biased because I'm actually someone who loves the kind of bright and vibrant colours. But I think even looking at things from a branding perspective, and look at Charlie XCX's Brat, how simple but bright and eye-catching it is, compared to this from Glass Animals. I do wonder whether the branding and the imagery to reflect the concept of this album isn't quite what I would have hoped for from a band who have been so creative and so unique before. The cover art from How to Be a Human Being, with all the different faces and the concept of each song being about a different character and getting to work out who was who on the cover, or the bright neon video game inspired tones of Dreamland. Like when I saw Glass Animals live on their most recent tour, the whole stage display was like a loading screen for Windows 98. It felt so cool and so unique. And part of me does feel a little sad that we seem to have gone from that really vivid and well-defined image to something very muted. Maybe that's a deliberate conceptual decision on the part of Dave and the band. So thanks to Wikipedia. This album was partly inspired by the success of Heatwaves in 2020, of course, the breakout single, with frontman Dave Bailey saying that sometimes you aren't able to change as quickly on a personal level. He explained that success can leave one feeling like a spectator, with accompanying expectations to act a certain way which confused him to the point of not knowing who he was or if anything was real. I mean, it must be a very surreal feeling to suddenly have this song like Heatwaves that's taken on a life of itself beyond the band. I think the crazy thing about it is it's one of those songs that more people know Heatwaves than know Glass Animals. And other bands' breakthrough songs, you look at like Radiohead and Creep. I think everyone knows Radiohead pretty well. But with Glass Animals, I remember when I was at their gig and I took a video of Life Itself and they shared it to their story. And I had so many fans DMing me like, oh, what song is this? And it's crazy to me. It's like, what song is this? This is one of Glass Animals' biggest songs, but they were suddenly exposed to so many people who wouldn't really have known their music before, and the kind of people, you know, through TikTok or other platforms who they're more likely to listen to one song rather than delve into an artist and get to know them. So the title is about the power and the mystery of human connection in a universe that may make us feel overwhelmingly small. I think the problem, at least having listened to that album and reading this now, I don't necessarily get that from the album. Maybe I need to be analysing it in more depth, but that just didn't seem to leap out to me. Dave Bailey also explained the lead single Creatures in Heaven is about a moment in time having the capacity to be enormously formative and life-changing, which of course will be, you know, the impact of Heat Waves, its release, and the transformative nature of it on the career of the band. And I will say as well, I think that sometimes it seems in music like emotional challenge and trauma can lead to great artistic outpouring. I think Joy Division's a great example. You think of all the things that Ian Curtis went through and the incredible art that he was able to produce. And Dreamland, born off the back of the COVID pandemic and the trauma of lockdown and being isolated from everyone, there was so much emotional charge going into that album, and you really felt it on the album tracks. You know, the melon and the coconuts, how desperate Dave's vocals sounded across the board. Like Tokyo Drifting, every single vocal from Dave, it felt like there was so much urgency, and compared to that, I Love You So Fucking Much feels very muted. And looking at the concept of the album, it seems like that's partially a true reflection of where Dave and the band were, trying to process their sudden mass success, but also an artistic decision. And I think the artistic decision part is what makes it a bit more difficult for me with this album, because I miss so many points on this record, that Your Love Deja Vu energy that slaps you on the face. It is in places, and I will talk about them, but it does feel like it's an album that sometimes struggles to get out of third or fourth gear. So the critical reception. I think you can't really judge whether an album is good or not by what people, whether they're critics or the general populace, think of it, but it is interesting to compare this record to maybe the previous records we've had from Glass Animals to see if they're the sense of something being a little different this time around is there objectively, or whether it's kind of a non-starter as a talking point. And when you look at the performance commercially and critically of this album, the 5 on the UK charts, I think, again, the UK charts is a bit of a strange beast. We've had Taylor Swift dominating it for so long, but for this album to debut at number 5, maybe the band would hope for something a little higher than that. Dreamland was up number 2. So admittedly not a number 1, but it does seem like a bit of a muted reaction to it compared to what you'd think for a follow-up to an album like Dreamland. Admittedly, looking at the album charts and the usual offenders, we've got like Olivia Rodrigo and Taylor Swift up there, you know, 2nd and 4th. And Eminem, I don't think anyone was going to beat him for number 1 at the moment. But then Soft Play, who used to be Slaves, in number 3. It's strange to see a band like them outsell Glass Animals when, at least if we're going by popularity on Spotify, Soft Play have got 890,000 monthly listeners to Glass Animals 26 million. Look, obviously, streams on Spotify don't tell the whole story. That's less of a kind of signal of co-signing a particular artist than a knowledge that you like one or two of their songs. But from what I've seen of Glass Animals, they are a band who've inspired a cult following and intensity, and it does feel to me like the core Glass Animals fans who loved everything up from Zabba to Dreamland might be struggling to connect with this album in the same way that they have before. And I think that's the position I find myself in. I love Glass Animals. I'm not a music critic. I'm not someone who gives number scores out of 10. I really wanted to love this album on first listen, but sadly, in practicality, that didn't quite happen. Much more importantly than all of that, though, I've got the subreddit, the Glass Animals subreddit, and the mega thread for I Love You So Fucking Much. Just scrolling down to seeing what people have said most recently, because these are core fans of the band on the subreddit for the band. They're not people with an agenda or people who don't like the band or middling, in-passing music reviewers who like to think that because they've got a blog, they're Pitchfork or Pitchfork themselves. These are real fans, and this is what they think. And one comment here saying, really disappointing as a one-time fan. This is their Coldplayification album. This person says, finally listen to the album, it's fire, I love it. If you came and saying the album is garbage or unlistenable, you're part of the toxic fan base every artist shits on. The last 7 tracks of the album are quite good IMO, I like them a lot. The first 3 tracks are weird choices to open your album on, I don't like them at all. Admittedly, I think, again, jumping ahead, Tear in Space is the one that raised my eyebrow a bit, but This album does start at a bit of a slow pace, and I think Creatures in Heaven, there isn't this strong sound. I think the Coldplayification people are talking about here, I love Coldplay, but more recently, even looking at Coldplay's latest song, what is it, Feels Like Falling in Love? It's like the emotional core of the music has slightly dampened in lieu of something that sounds a bit more EDM. And I don't think for a second Glass Animals are trying to be more mainstream, because, you know, they achieved that with Heatwaves. They have no reason to. I think it just happens that the sound on this album, it's a bit more muted compared to the intensity of Dreamland. And that emotional intensity, you know, you think of tracks like Agnes and Cocoa Hooves, just how desperate Dave's voice and his lyrics sound. I think where I at times lose this album is it's lacking that urgency, it's lacking that intensity. Here's someone saying, not going to sugarcoat it, this album's really terrible. The lyrics sound like they were written by an AI, though they disagree with me that Dave's performance of them is really good. There are some glaringly awful rhymes in almost every song on the album. He's an incredible singer but a bad songwriter. I totally disagree with that. Melon and the Coconut is a genius song, and even like the kind of, I know what we call them, the Dave Bailey-isms, playing too much of that GTA, talking about being Dr. Dre, and then I think there's a lyric on this album about like shitting the bed. I love it when Glass Animals just like throw kind of modern slang into their lyrics. It works so well for me since Dreamland. It feels so tongue-in-cheek and so bizarre. Like, clap, clap, you're a clever, clever cookie now. It's like bizarre, it's surreal, but it works and I love it. It's so charming. So he's not a bad songwriter, but on this album I do feel like, for whatever reason, Dave's work is not as good as I've heard it. This person goes on to say, the texture is way too simple, the mastering feels off. I'm gonna get to this. I'm gonna get to this because I agree with this point and I will revisit it. So yeah, the moral of the story is, people have different perspectives, but if you've got your core fans on your subreddit saying, you know, the album's bad, it's not just, oh, well, the usual suspects are chiming up and being negative. There's something a little deeper rooted here. So that is what I want to explore, and we'll continue to explore it. So track by track, I'm going to quickly try and run through this album. I won't have something to say about every track, but there's a few in particular I want to zone into. So we start with Show Pony, and I don't agree that this is like a bad song or anything. I think this is a fine opening, and this album has really grown on me. This album has grown on me a lot, and I struggled with it the first time I listened to it to really anchor and enjoy it. But the more I listen to it, the more enjoyable each song becomes. I'm not the biggest fan of a lyric like, I'll begin at the beginning. It feels a little too jarringly narrative, but this, as an album opener, is perfectly fun and perfectly playful and enjoyable. And it is, to me, a bit of a scene-setting song as well, so it does its job in that way. I mean, looking at the lyrics, roll those credits because the sequel's going to hurt maybe kind of an allusion to the fact that people might be disappointed after Heatwaves, that what follows might not be as good as what came before. I'm probably part of that meta now because I'm saying that Dreamland clicked with me more. But even then, I think the weird thing about it was, I think core Glass Animals fans, Heatwaves is not a song that they would rank in a top 5 or top 10. I think for core Glass Animals fans, you know, songs like Agnes and Pork Soda are right up there. You know, I really think Deja Vu Your Love is probably a fan favourite as well. At least for me, that feels like such a gorgeous and unique song. Dreamland itself, the title track. So it's a case of the people who, well, the casual viewers aren't going to be as engaged because they're just there for the kind of the passing catchy anthems like the Heatwaves, but the core fans are the ones going, this is a little different. I haven't really had the chance to fully unpick all of the lyrics, but at least Show Pony for me feels like a kind of, it's an easing into the album. It's a scene-setting track, which doesn't blow your socks off, but it gets you intrigued. And then we go into What the Hell is Happening, which it's like you start to feel that instrumentally this album isn't as intense as Dreamland. There's not these kind of vast soundscape and these like really orchestral synthesized moments. The Coldplayification, it does feel a bit more like more recent Coldplay, where it's like the toned down EDM, not the kind of paradise powerful stadium chanty anthems. It's also interesting that this album apparently is about, you know, the human connection in a grand scale, because I took this album I Fucking Love You So Much as Dave talking about his partner. It felt like a love album to me. And, you know, we've seen a lot of bands like Fontaines DC really play around with what a love song is and what a love song can be. Obviously, that song is a love song to Ireland, even though it sounds like it's being sang to a partner, to a girl. But I think in this occasion, it feels so literal and so upfront that there's not enough there to make you try to look for the subtext. And as an aside, I've heard quite a few people say they don't like the album name or the censorship of it. It is a weird name for an album. I think the whole concept just does feel a little kind of weird to me. There's kind of, like I say, the Space 2001 Odyssey imagery and the neo-noir filter over everything with the space theme that's kind of just there. And then obviously the love that comes in as well. It just doesn't seem to connect together as well as maybe previous Glass Animals albums have. Now we get onto Creatures in Heaven. I will say I love the chorus. It's so catchy. Like, it's been stuck in my head, and then hearing it now, it is still catchy. This is my preferred single on the album. I'm usually with Glass Animals much more into the album tracks, but this, you know, this is up there for me. I think this is a fine track. It's nice and catchy, and Bury Me Here in Your Laundry Pile, again, it's nice kind of domestic imagery that we get with Glass Animals a lot. Like, I could be a stay-at-home G.I. Joe, domestic bliss. This is what Glass Animals and Davey are really good at. I keep calling him Davey because of Wavy Davey. What Dave is really good at, like, building these kind of fun, relatable images to fit nicely into indie pop songs. And he has a very unique turn of phrase that make Glass Animals stand out from their contemporaries. So Creatures in Heaven, you know, great song, nothing wrong with it. And now we get on to Wonderful Nothing, and I think this is the kind of the pivotal song for me in kind of understanding this album and how people feel about it. Because for me, if this song had been released in the Dreamland era, it would be a 10 out of 10 knocked out of the park track. But for whatever reason, in this era, on this album, with this concept, it starts great. I love those vocals. I love the kind of the epicness of it, and it's got a bit of a Your Love Deja Vu quality to it, and you're just waiting for it to kick into the drop and the full gear. I love Dave's vocals, love them here. And you're like, okay, we're 4 tracks into this album, now we're getting into it, and then this happens at the minute mark. And this part here, there's just something about it, it just feels so bare, and it's just a little underwhelming, like that hit. And I love Dave's lyrics here. Vocally, everything you could want from Dave is there, but when that drop hit, I was like, is this right? Like, am I hearing this right? And I said I'd go back to the Reddit comment, because this guy, the Rapa, has said exactly what I thought when I first heard it, which is that the mastering feels off, the songs sound thin and watery. I think specifically, I wouldn't say that about every song, but just this one. Wonderful Nothing's bass drop was built up by the song, but the punch lacked any sort of weight. If this album was produced and mastered the way that Dreamland was, that would have been the hardest, like, bang, you know, straight around the face. Like, if you listen to, I've got to play now, Your Love. It just feels so, like, symphonic, orchestral, magnificent. And these lyrics, this is that, like, intensity, that urgency that you get throughout this album when Dave is saying, every night I let you eat me alive, I want you to eat me alive. And I'm like, this is what I fell in love with from this album, that kind of rawness, that Dave leaves everything on the table. And compared to this album, it just feels like I Love You So Fucking Much holds back. And I don't know whether that's an artistic decision or whether that's, you know, the band and Dave trying to process what their success is and reflect that through the record. I still love Wonderful Nothing. I think it's a brilliant track. I think Dave's vocals are awesome. And, you know, it's the first point in the album where I'm like, okay, now we're listening to a Glass Animals record. But compared to the tracks on Dreamland that are the similar points to it, it just doesn't pack that 1-2 punch that Dave's singing about. It'd still go off live though, and I'd love it. But now, you know, A Tear in Space. This is the point on the album which kind of loses me a little bit, because this drop is. It feels like something that Major Lazer would leave in the studio, and it breaks my heart to say it because, you know, I think Glass Animals are such a brilliant band, and this album, you know, doesn't change that opinion. They are a brilliant band. They are a brilliant band that places on this album. But this song, this feels like an autopilot song, to you know, borrow the space analogy. This is one of the few points of the album that I really can't. It won't grow on me. It won't grow on me. I don't know, man. I don't think that's a great kind of look for a great sound for Glass Animals. You know, the second half of the album I think is generally solid. I Can't Make You Fall in Love Again. It has this very like epic space opera feeling synth building up. And this is where, you know, I disagree with the Reddit comment that was saying the whole production of the album feels off. I think it's just in a couple of places, like Wonderful Nothing, that it doesn't feel like it quite delivers on what you would want it to. Yeah, the ending to How I Learned to Love the Bomb, it does take a while to build up this track, but again, I think this is a fun track. I think it's a good one, it's a solid one. And when it reaches its crescendo, it does deliver for me. White Roses has got a beautiful start as well. The synth sounds towards the second half of the album are, you know, really, really nice. It's the vintage Glass Animals. White roses in the red dirt. This is another track I really love, and you know, when I was listening to the album earlier, it's just a big boost when this song comes on. It feels like more of the recent Glass Animals sound. White Roses in the Red Dirt, it's not a super complicated lyric, but it's one that works so well. You said it's so beautiful it hurts, and I knew it in my heartburst. It's simple, but it's effective. It's fun, and it feels like that emotion's coming through. But now we get up to the point that I think is the highlight of the album. On the Run, the penultimate track. I love this track. This is by far my favorite on the album. I love that little synth loop in the background. It feels, it's got that like helium quality of being like distant and mournful. In fact, is that a guitar? Is that a guitar that's been really heavily synthesized? This is the perfect song, and there's the lyric. That I shit the bed anyway. I love that. I think that's Glass Animals. I think Dave's so funny and witty and tongue-in-cheek as a person, as a lyricist. And On the Run it's like not just Dreamland, it's a progression from Dreamland. It's like a lot of things that make Dreamland good, plus you know, the experience of Glass Animals since then, the new ideas. And it feels like there's a kind of absolution in the lyrics of this, so like a sudden realization as well. I just wish the whole album was like On the Run, really. But it's not like they've lost it. It's just not quite as consistent as maybe they have been before. You know, it's a good Glass Animals song when Dave refers to himself in the third person, or at least someone else talking to him and calling him Dave. Thanks for all the fish. Is that? I know that's going to be a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. Thanks for all the fish. So long and thanks for all the fish when the dolphins leave the earth. I mean, that's very Dave coded. This is a beautiful song, you know. I know I'm not someone who ranks albums out of 10, but this is a 10 out of 10 song. I'm happy to say it when I'm like, this is just brilliant. And so getting up to Lost in the Ocean, I think this is another one, maybe a little bit like Blue by Billie Eilish, where when I first heard it, it's a little bit subtle. But the more I listen to it, the more I see the kind of the subtle genius of it. You know, the brilliant little points in the album. It's a really pretty, tender opening. I think he's really going for the dolphin Hitchhiker's Guide metaphor with Lost in the Ocean. You get lost in the ocean. It feels kind of like a lullaby. It's a really nice ending for the album. And I love that little metaphor of Dave comparing himself to a cigarette. Chew me up, stub me out, he'll press me down into the ground. Laughing and crying, staying up my lunch, no doubt eating pre-made sandwiches. So yeah, this album, what is the takeaway? What are the overall thoughts on it? And should you listen to it? First of all, absolutely, without hesitation, listen to this album. Check out this album. It is a great album. It is a great album. Maybe for Glass Animals standards, that they've set the bar very high for themselves with the first 3 albums. It's not as great as their previous releases, but I think still, at several points on this album, Glass Animals and Dave show why we love them so much. As a big fan of the band, it did take me more time to get into this album. When I first listened to this album, I didn't like it at all. And the reason why I'm making this video now is because I didn't want to just make a really negative video about my initial reaction, because Glass Animals have kind of earned the right to take a bit more time to kind of listen and appreciate an album rather than just the first listen. And when I did stay with the album, when I've listened to it repeat times, it has grown on me, even A Tear in Space, which I would probably never choose to listen to in isolation. But if it was on the album, I wouldn't skip it, you know. I listened to this whole album going for a walk in the park before I made this video, and I really enjoyed it. It's a really enjoyable album, and in places we see really exciting growth from Glass Animals as a band, and I think it's probably actually nice for them that this album doesn't have a Heatwaves on it, because they are this funny little band from Oxford who made really surreal, high conceptual tracks, suddenly who became, you know, at one point the UK's biggest band because of one song that did well in lockdown. And I feel like all the pressure that was put on them, being touted as the saviour of British music internationally, I don't know if that's the best thing for a band, and especially not for Glass Animals, given how Dave Bailey just seems like a really nice, normal guy who you'd want to have a pint with and have a cool conversation about nerdy music facts and his favourite Radiohead album. You know, I remember when I was on Glass Animals AMA, I think late last year, I managed to sneak a question in for Dave about whether the video for Agnes was inspired by Radiohead and their video for No Surprises, and I got the yes. I got the yes from him, so I know that's the kind of level he operates on. Ultimately, if you think this is a perfect album as well, don't let anyone tell you differently. Don't let me dissuade you from parading your love for it all around. But I think it is interesting, as I hope I've done successfully on this video, to look at why the reaction to it from fans and general people, general music fans alike, has been not as straightforward as previous Glass Animals albums. If you liked this video, please do drop it a like and subscribe to my channel. You will hopefully now see as well a join button either next to this video or on my about page on YouTube, because I'm so proud to say I have fully hit YouTube partner. This channel is now fully monetized. This video, we'll see if it survives with the music, but if you enjoy the kind of content that I make and want to see more of it, subscribing to the channel, using the channel memberships are the best way of supporting me. And if you want to catch me live on Twitch, I'm there pretty much every day at 7 PM at twitch.tv/TimSenna. Big love to all of you guys. I think another Glass Animals video will be coming soon, and I hope you have a beautiful time in whatever you're doing this evening, or afternoon, or morning, whenever you're watching the video.